Why did the men in the Bible have so many wives?
All right, so first, in the Old Testament, whenever you see this, let's go ahead and get a big caveat out there. It doesn't ever really work out that well. In fact, anytime, even when God would seemingly allow these things to happen, or even command them through something called the Levirate marriage, which we'll get to, it almost never works out well. Because when God instituted marriage, he knew what he was doing when he made it between one man and one woman. Now, the thing that happens in the Old Testament, but not the New, is in the Old Testament, um, there was one institution that was both church and state. It was called a theocracy. So if you were part of the country, you were part of the faith, and if you're part of the faith, you were part of the country. And so it became Israel's job then to care for the least of these. And so in the Old Testament, when this was this way, if a woman's husband died, there wasn't a lot she could do to earn a living in a godly way. And so God instituted something called a Levirate marriage, which would say then that the deceased brother would take her as a wife, both to make sure that she and her children were cared for, but also to carry on the lineage, the family's name, to carry on this idea that God kept his promises from generation to generation to care for all. Now, in the New Testament, this is no longer the case because the church is sent into all nations. And so you can be a Christian and a nationality. They're not the same thing anymore. And so here, Paul very clearly talks about when it, for example, comes to the office of the holy ministry, you be the husband of one wife, because it's just not a good idea. And even when it was sort of in a place where something not ideal was going to happen, it was only ideal because something even worse had already happened. So in the Bible, you will find men taking more than one wife, and even then, just read the stories. Like, it never works out that well. But this is why. So we fall back on God's institution of marriage to show us the right form and function of it, to offer up children, to bear compassion, to be a picture of Christ and the church, to be a godly place for sex. And in all of those ways, um, you can also see that the man taking more than one wife, in a lot of ways, being an attack on all of them. And so follow then what the Lord would actually set up, not just what all the other people did. Because in the same way that your mom warned you that if all the other kids jumped off a bridge, you should not. If all the Old Testament characters took more than one wife,